PowerPoint presentation prepared on the topic of the social origins of the sexual division of labor. Author, Maria Mies, Sociology of Gender, So 583, presented by Anup Adhikari, Professor, Bheem Raj Sigdel, Master of Arts in Sociology, 2nd year/3rd semester, Sarasvati Multiple Campus, Tribhuvan University, Kathmandu, Nepal. Table of Contents. Cover page. Table of Contents. Interface of the journal. The search for origins within a feminist perspective. Problems of biased concepts. Suggested approach. Strategies of natural laws. Female productivity, the precondition of male productivity. Man the hunter under feudalism and capitalism. Interface of the journal. The search for origins within a feminist perspective. The search of unequal, hierarchical, relationship in society and the unbalanced, asymmetrical, having two sides or halves that are not the same, not symmetrical, division of labor between men and women specially, in particular, has been prohibited, tabooed, action that is avoided for religious or social reasons, not acceptable to talk about or do, since the rise of positivism and functionalism as the dominant school of thought among Western social scientists in the 1920s. Suppression and neglect of Marxist thinking and theorizing in the academic world, especially in the Anglo-Saxon world, has been part of a larger campaign against it. A Germanic inhabitant of England between the 5th century and the Norman conquest, Martin and Voorhees, 1975, and this question is timely asked by academicians and the woman activists were involved to liberation, emancipation, process of being set free from legal, social or political restrictions, for women, but the ideological differences between various feminist groups, and concludes that the emancipation is not biological destiny but it must be something to be abolished. The sexual inequality in asymmetric relation is the necessary consequence of their revolution, and the academicians differs that the question of origins should not be raised, but social origins of this relationship is part of the political strategy of women's emancipation. Writer, 1977. It is not possible to understand and overcome the women's liberation, emancipation, without knowing unbalanced, asymmetric, relationship between men and women. The aim of studying unbalanced relationship between men, woman and the search of origins is not to analyze and interpret, but it needs to solve it, and this political and strategic motivation fundamentally differentiates between academicians, researchers and with feminists. The following topics presents a contribution to spreading the consciousness of the existence of gender hierarchy in collective action aimed at dismantling, deconstruct, pull apart, destroy, the asymmetrical relationships. Problems of biased concepts. The origins of unequal relationship between sexes provided by the social scientists was not adequate, satisfactory, adequate, acceptable, real. These relationship was only compared or theorized through various theories such as positivist functionalist, evolutionists, or from Marxist approach, and presented as biologically determined beyond the scope of social change, but it is useful to identify the biologistic biases in some of the concepts commonly used in the debates. According to Freud, physical anatomy is the most deep-rooted obstacle to the analysis of the causes of women's oppression and exploitation, but the woman activists prioritizes that social and historical factors are not cause of exploitation, but there is the lack of analyzing process, such as nature, of labor, of the sexual division of labor, of the family and of productivity. The author has presented the three aspects. If these concepts are used without doing the critique, then it cannot raise the issue properly. 2. These concepts of nature is only becoming the way to explain social inequalities, exploitative relations as inborn and, hence, behind the scope, beyond of social change. 3. Woman's household, child care work as housewives, production and reproduction, psychologically defined by society as usually functioned as the biology of nature as the same time the nature has provided them with uterus. Due to this, Women's are tend to do the domestic household work and haven't the chance to work in income-generating activities, but in the same case men's productive works for production of surplus value under capitalist condition has given prioritized, but the woman can do the same work as the men does by providing the opportunity in generating surplus value. She has focused that hands and head of women is useful more than womb and breast for surplus production. The biologically biased concepts of labors also prevails in the sexual division the labors. At the same time these division of labors was presented as the truly human ones, which includes men's work only, i.e. conscious, rational, planned, productive, etc., whereas women's labor are seen as basically determined by their nature. Mies argues that men's labor as the human labor and the woman's labor as the natural labor, that laborers or workers is a relationship of dominance and even of exploitation, and focuses that these asymmetrical hierarchy and exploitation must be analyzed without analyzing the division of labor between equal partners. Author has also prioritized that the nuclear family, partnership within the family, in European culture also creates hierarchical forms which is unequal in nature. Author has focused that these provided examples of biological biases should be symmetrically avoided. She raised the question that, why did the division of labor become a relationship of dominance and exploitation? Why did it become an asymmetric, hierarchical relationship? And this question still looms, over all discussions of women's liberation. Suggested approach. The author has provided the answers of these two questions. A. What can we do to eliminate the biases between men and women? Not use them at all, as some women suggest. We have to accept that the basic concepts used in our analysis have already been occupied, like territories or colonies, by dominant sexist ideology, but we cannot abandon them, and we can look at them from below, not from the point of view of the dominant ideology but from that of the historical experiences of the oppressed, exploited and subordinated, and their struggle for emancipation, liberation. In the capital accumulation through surplus value, it has to be defined as work and not as unconscious natural activity. Human beings do not only live, they produce their life. To provide an answer of the origins of the hierarchical sexual division of labor, studies in primatology, prehistory, and archaeology are useful and necessary for our research, and we cannot expect them to provide an answer unless we are able to develop non-biologistic concepts of men and women and their relations to nature and history. We must study that what is happening to women under the impact of capitalism, both in its center and in its periphery, where poor peasant and tribal societies are now being integrated into a so-called new national and international division of labor under the dictates of capital accumulation. Both in the capitalist centers and in the peripheries, a distinct sexist policy was used to subsume, classify, include whole societies and classes under the dominance capitalist production relations. Strategies of natural laws. These strategies usually appears in the aspect, guise, appearance, of progressive or liberal family laws, e.g. the prohibition of polygamy, family planning and development policies. The demand to integrate women into development, first voiced at the International Women's Conference in Mexico, 1975, is largely used in third world countries to recruit women as the cheapest, most docile and manipulable, flexible, easy, labor force for capitalist production processes, both in agribusiness and industry as well as in the unorganized sector. Frabel, Cray, Heinrichs, 1977. Now, sexual division of labor is becoming a structural problem of a whole society, but not as a problem related to the family. The hierarchical division of labor between men and women is the dominant production relation and class relation of a particular time period, epoch, stage, is a dynamic approach and creates broader national and international divisions of labor. The author has presented the four strategies of natural laws in the text: I. Appropriation of nature by women and men. 2. The appropriation of their own bodies by women/men. 3. the human's objective relationship to nature, and 4. Man's objective relationship to nature. 10 international agreements which tackles gender inequality. I. Appropriation of nature by women and men. The physiological dimension of human nature is always linked to its social dimension. Therefore, human nature cannot be understood if we separate its physiology from its history. Human beings produce their lives and do not simply live, animals live. Human history, in contrast to natural history, is social history and is characterized by the three moments of 1. Producing means to satisfy needs, 2. Developing new instruments to satisfy new needs, and 3. Procreating through the relationship between men and women, all of which involve the appropriation of nature through sensuous, objective activity in accordance with Marx and Engels. But Engels is not able to answer the question of how humanity jumped from prehistory to social history, and he does not apply the method of dialectical historical materialism to the study of these primitive societies which have not yet entered into history. To understand women and men's history from a materialist perspective, their interaction with nature and how they developed their own social nature must be analyzed, but the Engels would relegate, degrade, put down, lower, women's interaction with nature to evolution and suggest that women have not yet entered history as defined by men, which begins with civilization and the exploitation of women and men. 2. The appropriation of their own bodies by women/men. Marx believes that the labor process involves the exchange of matter between humans and nature and the development of the body. Men and women interact with nature differently due to their organic differences, which have been historically interpreted and valued according to the dominant form of appropriation of natural matter. This has led to a qualitatively different relationship to their own bodies and two distinct forms of relations to the objects of sensuous, sexy, affective, luxurious, pleasurable, rich, and bodily activity. In capitalist conditions, women are socially defined as housewives and motherhood, which have lost its active and creative qualities. Appropriation and the concept of nature by Les Cayas, feminist postcard, Spellbound. 3. The human's objective relationship to nature. The text has discussed the difference between human and animal orientations to the environment, emphasizing the productive aspect of human interaction with nature. Women's relationship to nature is examined through their unique ability to produce children and milk. The author argues that this capacity is a conscious and social activity, and not simply a physiological function. Women have appropriated their own bodily nature and acquired experiential knowledge about their bodies and the generative forces of external nature. In pre-patriarchal societies, women knew better how to regulate the number of their children and the frequency of their births than modern women, who have lost this knowledge due to their subjection to the civilizing process of males. The article presents that women's production of new life is linked inseparably to the production of the means of subsistence for the new life. The first division of labor by sex, between the gathering activities of women and the sporadic, periodic, unpredictable hunting of men, most probably originated in the fact that women were responsible for the daily subsistence. 4. Man's objective relationship to nature. This portion explores the historical and symbolic relationship between men and nature, specifically in terms of productivity and the use of tools. Men's self-conception as productive and dominant is closely linked to the invention and control of tools, while women are often associated with external nature and defined as part of the physical conditions of male production. The subordination, inferiority, submission, dependence, of female productivity to male productivity was likely a result of class struggles and the establishment of patriarchal property relations. The analogies, similarity, correlation, comparison, between sexual organs and tools throughout history reveal how men define their relationship to nature, women, and their own bodies. Men's apparent, supposed, presumed, visible, independence and superiority in productivity was only possible due to the development of female productivity. Female productivity, the precondition of male productivity. The thesis is that female productivity is essential to male productivity and world development. Women are producers of new generations, and making all other forms of production becomes meaningless without them. Men have historically used and subordinated, inferiority, female productivity to develop their own forms of productivity. The asymmetrical division of labor between sexes in history will be analyzed with this text as a guiding principle to debunk naturalistic explanations for social inequality. The author has presented the following 4 explanations in the text: I. The myth of man the hunter, 2. Women's tools, men's tools, 3. Pastoralists, and 4. Agriculturalists. I. The myth of man the hunter. This text discusses the role of women in early human societies and challenges of common belief that hunting was the main source of food and the most important activity. Instead, the author argues that women who were mainly gatherers were responsible for providing the daily subsistence and guaranteeing the survival of the clan or band. Research has shown that women among hunters and gatherers provide up to 80% of the daily food, while men contribute only a small portion through hunting, which was an economy of risk. The author also challenges the man-the-hunter hypothesis, which suggests that hunting was the motor of human development, and argues that it is biased and overlooks, the important role of women in providing food, inventing tools, and shaping society. The text has also discussed the relationship between men and women and suggests that the existing dominance of men over women was originated in the biological infrastructure of Stone Age hunters. The author challenges this view and argues that it is important to recognize the contributions of women to early societies and to understand the gender biases that still continue, in the study of human evolution. 2. Women's tools, men's tools. The man-the-hunter model was grew, from the man-the-toolmaker model, with the invention of hunting tools and weapons, marking a specialization of men in killing. Women's inventions related to subsistence, food, support, supplies, maintenance, production are often ignored, but their technology remained productive, while hunting technology is essentially destructive and cannot be used for other productive activities. The significance of hunting lies not in its economic productivity but in its objective relationship to nature, which is predatory, acquisitive, hunting, bloodthirsty, and exploitative. The use of arms gave hunters power over living beings and established a relationship of dominance with nature, which became the main criterion, of men's productivity. The emergence of specialized hunting technology only implied the possibility of exploitation, and as long as hunters remained confined to their limited context, they were dependent on women's subsistence production for survival. 3. Pastoralists. The establishment of patriarchal relationships between men and women occurred after the men discovered their own generative capacities through domesticating and breeding animals. Women became a part of movable property, like cattle, and their productivity was reduced to their fertility, which was controlled by men. This new mode of production was made possible by the monopoly of men over arms and the observation of the reproductive behavior of animals. This mode of production required means of coercion, force, compulsion, for the manipulation of animals and humans and for the expansion of territory. 4. Agriculturalists. The article has discussed the origins of exploitative relationships between men and women and the roots of slavery in pre-colonial Africa. It suggests that while pastoral nomads have played a role in the development of exploitative relationships between men and women, then these exploitation, exploitative dynamics, also existed among hoe cultivators and agriculturalists. At those societies, older men were able to establish dominance over younger men and women due to their ability to accumulate more wives who would work only for them. Hunting expeditions were used as a means of kidnapping women and young men for sale as slaves or as wives against bride wealth. This predatory mode of production based on the male monopoly over arms could become productive only when there were existing production economies that could be raided, attack, assault, harass, loot. These examples or the article demonstrates the close linkage between pillage, loot, and robbery, on the one hand, and trade on the other. Man the Hunter under Feudalism and Capitalism. The text has discussed the evolution of predatory, hunting, aggressive, exploitative, violent, modes of appropriation of labor, means of production, and products, and how they have transformed over time. The text argues that these predatory modes were not abolished completely but rather preserved and transformed as new modes of production emerged. Likewise, this portion highlights the role of violence and coercion, force, compulsion, in the acquisition of producers, means of production, and products by non-producers, and how this has been maintained over time through new forms of labor centralization and the sexual division of labor. The predatory mode of acquisition, gain, purchase, investment, saw a renaissance, revival, renewal, glory, golden age, during the period of European feudalism, where feudal lords used violence and warfare to acquire new lands and peasants. This relationship was preserved through a dominance relationship between the lord and the serf, where the lord maintained a monopoly over the means of coercion. Similarly, in the early stages of capitalism, wage labor became the dominant form of labor control, built on the base of a tremendous, huge, massive, vast, expansion of the predatory mode of acquisition through the direct and violent acquisition of gold, silver, and other products, and the enslavement of African slaves and indigenous peoples. The text argues that these modes of production were based on the monopoly of effective weapons and the existence of breeding grounds of enough human cattle who could be hunted, appropriated, and subjugated, defeat, enslave, colonize, suppress, break. It also discusses how women were defined and controlled within these modes of production, with the patriarchal religions defining women as part of nature to be controlled and dominated by men. In overall, the text argues that the basic structure of these production relations remained exploitative and asymmetric, with only the forms of dominance and appropriation changing over time. Man the Hunter under Feudalism and Capitalism. This portion discusses the process of naturalization and domestication of women during the rise of capitalism in Europe and North America. It highlights how women of the working class and the bourgeoisie were suppressed and controlled by men, and how this was necessary for gaining control over the reproductive capacities of women. The author presents that the domestication of women became the model of the sexual division of labor under capitalism, and that it was achieved through centuries of brutal attacks against women's sexual and productive autonomy. The author connects the witch hunt in Europe to the slave raids in Africa, as both were efforts of men to reduce women to a condition of production, to be appropriated and exploited. The author argues that the male mode of production has natural limitations and that it was necessary to bring the generative and productive forces of European women under control. The article also discusses how millions of women, mostly of poor peasant or poor urban origin, were persecuted, oppressed, abused, victimized, tortured and burnt as witches because they tried to retain a certain autonomy, freedom, liberty, sovereignty, over their bodies. The author argues that the attack on the witches aimed not only at the subordination, dependence, inferiority, submission, subjection, of female sexuality but against their practices as abortionists and midwives. The witch hunt not only had the direct disciplinary effect of controlling women's sexual and reproductive behavior but also established the superiority of male productivity over female productivity. The passage highlights how the rise of the new capitalist class was built on the subjugation of women, and how women have learned to turn the actual violence used towards them by others through the centuries against themselves and to internalize it. Thank you.